Before we can easily set up our pricing rates in SMART Estimator, we need to create a template project. The reason for this is if we go into price it, I've got one small independent in this project. The software will only show me the pricing lines for the scaffolds that are actually present in the item. So I've got one pricing line for independent scaffold. I can't see the pricing for my bird cages, my lift shaft, my stair towers, etc. So what we need to do is create a template project, and the easiest way to do that is to go into Schedule It, into Scaffolds View, and just select one of every single scaffold type. Okay, and you can see it building up down here, and then we'll go into the add-ons and make sure that we have turned on one of every add-on. Okay, so we'll fully sheet that one, we'll put brick guards on, a cantilever fan, and we'll put a bridge in starting 2 meters and finishing 4 meters. And so now when we go to price it, it will show us the price lines for all of those scaffolds and add-ons. Okay. If you want to do banded pricing, there's a slightly different method. To save you time and effort, we've actually created a template project for standard pricing and a template project for banded pricing, which is available to download from the Help Center, which should be just below this video if you're already in the Help Center, or click the link and it will take you through to it. When you first open Price It, this is the screen you're going to see. This is the cost analysis sheet. Broadly, it's broken down into 3 sections. So we've got the labour section at the top where we calculate the labour cost to erect, to dismantle the scaffold, any adaptations, the wage on costs, carrying out labour and travel expenses if you're working remotely. Then coming down, we've got the material section. This is where you'll find your material costs, your hire and sale expenses, labour overheads, material overheads. And then coming down, we've got the margins and the discounts on the bottom third of the sheet, so profit margins, overspend, discounts, main contractor discount, and the extra hire. And then at the bottom of the formula, check rates, which we'll talk about a little bit as well. So before we go ahead and set up our labour pricing rates, first we need to set up the labour options and the material pricing options. So on the top toolbar, you'll find the labour options drop down. The first 2 options here, you can either price in hours, where you tell the software how many meters or meters square of scaffold your gang can put up per hour, or you price in currency, where you tell the software that for each meter of scaffold it's £10, £20, £30, and it will calculate the labour that way. So you choose which one of those you want to price in. Then you've got some additional pricing lines that we can turn on. So by default, for independent scaffolds, bird cages, etc., the cost of putting the boards onto the scaffold is included in that fixed line. If you turn on the board placement and the board movement price line, you can actually set a separate cost for putting the boards and then moving them. So for progressive scaffolds, you can turn on a price line for tie fixing, so you can put some cost against adding the ties, and also structural lifts. So by default, all lifts are priced at the same rate. If you turn on the structural lift price line, you can set a lower cost for structural lifts without boards than the main working lifts. You can also turn on banded pricing. We're not going to cover that in this video. We're going to do a separate video about how to set up the banded pricing rates. It's a little bit more in depth. And also you can set your labour cost per hour and your day work rate as well. The labour cost per hour is used in the software's calculation for the labour expenses and days away and things like that. Next, we've got the material options, so you can choose whether you're going to price per component using the material listing configuration in the software, price as a percentage of the labour, or not charge for material cost at all. In this video, we're going to look mainly at pricing by the material list. Now we've set up our labour options, we need to go ahead and set up our actual pricing rates for the erect labour on the different scaffolds and add-ons. To change one of these rates is really straightforward. So to change a pricing method, you can click into the drop down and you can change to a different pricing method. It will go red to show that you've changed it. And to change a price, you can just click into the price line and type over if we change that to £35. So what we need to do then is save that to our default rate template or shared another rate template. So once we've made the changes we want to make, we hit Use Settings for all project items. And once we've done that, the red highlighting will disappear and the Save to Shared Rates button will be made visible. We can then click on that. You can either overwrite your default template or you can create multiple pricing rate templates by giving them a new name. Okay, so I'm going to give this one a new name. I'm going to call it Training. Hit Save. So now all my future projects that I use the training pricing rate, and I can select them under Select Rates here, will be charged at £35 a metre square for independence. So what you need to do next is go through and set up your preferred rates for the erect labour for all of your scaffold types and add-ons and save it into the shared rates using those steps. So just to recap, we change the pricing method. If we want, we can leave it as it is. We change the cost. So overwrite any of these light green boxes, they'll go red. We hit this button up top. And then once we've done that, the Save to Shared Rates button will be made visible. And we can click on a pricing rate and save over it to record that change. Okay, so we'll go through and set all of those up. Moving down the next section, you've got your adaptions. You can set a default cost per adaption for the scaffold types, although in my experience it very much depends on what the adaptation is going to be, and these will generally be variable, so most people will leave this set to 0 and just add them on a job by job basis. Next up is your dismantle. So if you want to achieve an erect dismantle split of about 70-30, you really need this at 50%. Okay, if your dismantle cost is included in the labour figures you've put up in that top line, you could always leave it set to 0. But for this one, I'll set it to 50. So we'll set that to 50. And then you've got travel expenses. Again, you can preset rates for these, but in practice they're often variable, so we tend to leave them blank. And then you've got your wage on cost. This is to cover for tax, national insurance, PAYE expenses, your ERR, that sort of thing. So most companies, this is around 30%. Again, if you're running a sort of all-in pricing figure, it may well be included in that labour figure you put in at the top, in which case you can leave it set to 0. If you're not pricing in currency, so 10, 20, 30 pounds a metre per metre square or per lift or whatever your prices may be, and you prefer to price in hours or man hours more specifically, as we touched on earlier, you can switch to price in hours from currency. Setting up the rates, how you save the rates is all exactly the same. The difference is you choose your scaffolding dimension, in this case metre square, and then you tell the software how many of that dimension per man per hour. So if my 3-man gang can do 9 metres square scaffold per hour, that boils down to about 3 metres per man per hour. So I would put 3 in here, and then that will give me an hourly cost of how long it's going to take to put that up in man hours. So actual time to erect will be a third of that if we're using 3-man gangs, and it will put a currency cost. That cost is calculated using the labour cost per hour that we set up here. So that normally needs to be an average of what each individual in the gang earns, because obviously not everyone will be on the same rate. So I would take the total gang cost, divide it by 3 or 4, however many are in the gang, and put what's that figure in there. And so then the software will use that to calculate the labour cost. In the next section, we're going to look at the material section. So this broadly covers our material hire, contracted expenses, material purchase, design, and some of the overhead. So the material hire, the first kind of segment, you can do it in a couple of ways. So you can either price as a percentage of the labour, where you put a straight 5% of the labour cost above, and that will add on as your material hire, or you can price per component, which is a slightly better and more accurate way if you're trying to track your depreciation and your costs. So the figures displayed in the per component pricing method, we've got a kit list associated with the scaffold model, so it knows how much of each component that we're using, and it knows the cost of those components on a weekly basis because that's been set up in the background in the material configuration. That's covered in another video in a separate section, so there'll be a link to that below. So we don't have to set these prices, they're automatically calculated by the software. They take the hire period and they give us a cost for material hire. You can choose, and you can preset as well, how much of that cost you apply to the job. So mine was previously set at 0, I've just overridden it, it's now 100, so you can see that for this project it's just over £2,000 a week for the material hire. That's just my depreciation costs with a very small markup. Moving down, I've got my contract expenses I can input. My transport costs can be priced per tonne per mile, per tonne per hour. Your cost per tonne is obviously going to relate on what sort of vehicles you run, your insurance costs and all those sorts of things. You'll also notice there's a material purchase section, so whenever you add things like sheeting, debris netting, safety standards, those are pulled out separately to the hire cost and put on as a purchase cost direct to the customer. You've also got options to add design or other things, and then you've got your overheads. So you've got the option to add a labour overhead, which goes on the total labour cost, so that's the wages plus the wage on cost, plus the expenses, the travel, the hotels, etc. You could put an overhead on the material itself, and you can put an overhead on the output pay, which is just the labour to put the scaffold up and take it down. It doesn't include the wage on cost, and it doesn't include the expenses and ancillary costs around the labour. So it's going to be down to you and your business to decide what those overheads need to be. Normally I find they're around the 50 to 100% mark, depending on the business. If we're not pricing per component for our material depreciation, as previously mentioned, we can switch under material options to a percentage of the labour rather than per component, and that will just give us a straight percentage for the material. So we can just say 5% of our labour cost, and it'll assign a cost for the material hire, and equally the extra hire will have the option to set a separate percentage. So my extra hire might be 7% of the labour, and that cost will come across. There's also an option to set a progressive hire rate reduction for both the tube and the fittings. Broadly speaking, this is used if you're doing long-term progressive jobs, so the full material hire cost isn't really appropriate at the beginning and at the end potentially of the job, because obviously the scaffold is being progressively erected and potentially progressively dismantled. So you can adjust the percentage it charges of your total material hire to account for that. Finally, we get to the bottom third of the sheet. This is the margins and the discounts. So first up, you've got your profit margin. That's a percentage applied to the total cost of the job. You've then got the option to add separate percentages for stock losses against the labour cost and against the material hire. So the material hire percentage is going to guard against kit not coming back, kit being damaged. The stock losses for the labour is going to guard against ancillary costs, PPE being damaged, and so on. You've then got an overspend where you can put a percentage against the output pay. Broadly, that is your buffer against poorly estimated productivity and things like that. So you might add a 10% buffer to your labour estimate to account for the gangs not quite getting the scaffold up or down as fast as you're estimating. And then you've got material depreciation and a material purchase markup. So material depreciation goes against material hire. This is essentially going to be your profit margin or return on investment on the actual kit that you're hiring out. The material hire figures further up the form represent the cost, the depreciation cost against the kit for the business, and so this is the sort of profit margin on that to get some investment back from the kit that you bought. And the purchase markup for the material is things like your sheeting, debris netting, stuff like that. This is just putting a markup on top of the cost for the business. And then you've got the option to discount the job. Rare, I know, I don't think we're ever giving too many discounts. If you choose to give a discount, it's important to remember it has to be a negative figure. So if you want to put a discount in, it's got to be minus 5% to actually take off 5%. If you just put 5% in there, it will actually add 5%. Okay. And then coming down again, we've got the main contractor discount. This is a retrospective discount. So if you know you're going to get a 2.55% MCD or main contractor discount from your clients, if you're working with the top tier contractors, you can put 2.5%, 5% in here. And what it will do is essentially inflate the price that appears on the quote so that when they take their 2.5%, you actually get what you've estimated you want for that job. You can set up your tax. You can choose whether you're excluding or including. For UK guys, it's VAT. Anyone overseas, your relevant tax setting can go in there. And then you've got the total tender price and your extra hire cost down the bottom. Because we're pricing per component, the extra hire cost pulls from the material configuration. If we were pricing by percentage of the labour, there would be an option to set a percentage for your extra hire that's different to your contract hire percentage. And then finally, you've got your check rates down the bottom. These are your sort of sanity checkers. Most of us have a figure in our head, £35, £40 a metre, that tells us we're on the right track with our estimates. So obviously all the cost is broken down in the sheet above, but we'll take a dimension down on these check rates, divide the total metre square of scaffold by the total cost of the job to give you a kind of all-in figure to sanity check against. And that will be a great way of checking that you're on the right lines with your estimate.